Okay, let us get started. Welcome. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the California State Library's Government Publications section and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or CDFW, as you will hear them often referred to today, for a very special program featuring live visits to 3 of California's majestic coastal estuaries. Estuaries are referred to as the nurseries of the sea. They are unique habitats where fresh water from rivers and streams mix with salt water from the ocean and land transitions to sea. Our visits will be hosted by the staff and scientists who protect and maintain these lands. My name is Mona Robinson, and I'm the host of today's event. I'm a librarian in the Government Publications section of the California State Library, and today I am pleased to be joined by 2 co-hosts, Bradley Siebold, who is a senior librarian in our Government Publications section, and Whitney Albright from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Science Institute. Bradley and Whitney will be monitoring our Q&A section throughout the talk for any questions that you may have for the speakers, and Bradley will be reading your questions during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The California State Library is thrilled to partner with the CDFW for, this is actually our 2nd conservation lecture series with the CDFW. And this is going to be a fun and enlightening program. As Californians, we all enjoy the majesty of our beautiful state, and we hope that today's program will inspire each of you to explore our wild spots and do your part to support and protect our state's natural resources. Before we begin, I just have a bit of housekeeping to go over. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A section, and we will answer them at the end of the program during our Q&A session. This presentation will be recorded and made available after the program. Links will be sent to everybody who registered, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. Live transcription is enabled, so if you'd like to see captions, click the CC icon to show subtitles. If you run into any technical difficulties during the presentation, please put those in the Q&A section, and we will try and help you if we can. Also, Bradley has posted and included a few links in the chat window that are related to the California State Library and to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. For any of you that are joining us today who are eligible for a California State Library card and don't have one, please consider applying online. It's easy to get, and we really appreciate your support. Now it is on to our tour. Our estuary tour today will span the coast of California. We will begin our adventure in Northern California's Humboldt County at the Eel River Wildlife Area. Next, we travel to Monterey County in California's central region to visit the Elkhorn Slough Ecological Reserve. Finally, on our last stop, we will visit the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve in Orange County, Southern California. Each stop will feature live streaming of the CDFW staff and scientists who work to preserve and protect these spaces. Most of these spaces, I just want to note, are available for the public to visit. I will give you a brief introduction to our speakers, and then they will take it away. A quick reminder that the next segments are live feeds, and technology can be unpredictable, and so can my slide sharing. But we appreciate your patience as live feeds come in. We'll do our best to minimize technological issues, and so now let us buckle up and get ready to head down to the Eel River. Our first stop is in Northern California's Humboldt County as we join Peter Tira, CDFW Public Information Officer, and James Ray, Senior Environmental Scientist at the Eel River Wildlife Area. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and they will join us.
Mona, I think you need to disable, or excuse me, you need to turn on our camera on your end.
There. What do you think?
Thank you, Mona. Welcome everyone to Humboldt County, the Ocean Ranch Unit, which is part of the Eel River Wildlife Area. We are here on the North Coast. We have an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous day here and delighted to welcome you all to a very, very special place. Just for a sense of place, this property is located 10 to 12 miles south of Eureka and about 2 miles west of US Highway 101. It's the road less traveled, but again, as Mona mentioned, this is a public area open to visitors and enjoyment. I'm joined by James Ray, one of our senior environmental scientists who works out of our Eureka office. But I did want to mention that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is not a land agency kind of in the scope and magnitude of, say, state parks or the U.S. Forest Service, but we do own about 1 million acres of property, mostly open to visitors, right? The primary purpose is to protect and provide habitat for fish, wildlife, and native species. Public recreation often comes second, but this and the other properties we're going to visit today do offer quite a variety of public recreation opportunities: hiking, biking, kayaking, fishing, all available here at the Ocean Ranch Unit. And we're going to do the Ocean Ranch Unit, of course, home to a very important estuary where the Eel River flows into the Pacific Ocean. We're going to do a deep dive on that, but it's such a pretty place. We want to give you a look around really quickly. Terrific, terrific. James, we're here to talk and learn about estuaries. You're a scientist. Tell us what's so special about places like Ocean Ranch and the estuary here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. As Peter noted, my name is James Ray. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife in our Habitat Conservation Group. So, Mona already touched on this, but in its simplest terms, estuaries are places where a river meets the ocean and meets the land all in one place. These places are dynamic places. In estuaries, we have fresh water mixing, fresh water from the river mixing with salt water from the ocean. And estuaries are also tidal. So like I said, it means they're dynamic places. The salinity, the temperature, even where the water is present or not at any given time, is changeable through every day and then also through the seasons. So that type of movement and change really has implications or affects what types of plant communities and animal communities can live here. And so one of the important things to note about estuaries is they're very productive. So they're very productive places. They support high biodiversity and they create a lot of habitat for fish and wildlife species. But beyond that, they also provide other services to human societies. So they store carbon. Estuaries store more carbon than many other types of habitat on the planet, particularly the tidal marshes in estuaries. And they also filter our water. And then also they buffer working landscapes and communities and cultural resources from sea level rise and storm surge as well. So, for all of these reasons, for thousands of years, humans have been attracted to living in and around estuaries. And as a result of that, over the last 150 to 200 years, there's been a lot more intensive development around estuaries. And that has meant that in California, we've lost about 85 to 90% of our tidal marshes and tidal estuaries. So, you can imagine that with those types of losses, there's a loss of a lot of function and habitat and also biodiversity. So it's sort of the goal of this project and CDFW broadly, as well as other entities, to try and restore these places to fix some of that.
And James, the Ocean Ranch Unit recently underwent a massive restoration effort that's still ongoing. Tell us about that and tell us what the goal was with that.
Yeah, so some of that development that I just mentioned that's happened in the last 150 or 200 years, a very common practice has been to reclaim tidal marshes for use in agriculture. And so what that means is dikes and levees are created, and the tidal sloughs and channels are filled in and ditched and drained, and then tide gates are put in place to stop the tide from reconnecting with the landscape, which works great for agriculture, but not so great for some of those other processes that we talked about for wildlife and some of the processes that might support carbon storage and things like that. So at Ocean Ranch, essentially what we wanted to do, Ocean Ranch is one of the places where that kind of activity has occurred. So at this location, we want to reverse some of those things, and we want to restore full tidal hydrology on this landscape. So reconnect the tide, basically the ocean, with the landscape. And then by doing so, kind of restore some of the natural processes that brings along with it that supports the kind of wildlife and other benefits that we see here. So one of the ways we went about doing that, we began this project in 2022, and we breached some of the external levees at this site, which were keeping the tide out. We lowered other levees to allow the water to be conveyed across the landscape. And we also dug a network of tidal channels and sloughs to facilitate that water spreading out across the landscape. And that's really the hydrological, the water component of this. You know, that reconnects the tide, and that works on a lot of these processes that are important for habitat. But beyond that, we're also really interested in adding a little bit of diversity and a few more habitat features. And so what we did was we created additional habitat diversity on the marsh by creating little hummocks and ridges. And that's really good for native plant community diversity, but also for waterfowl and shorebirds. And then on the aquatic side, we also created shallow water habitat and deep water habitat. And that allows different fish in the community to use this place at different times of day, as we noted, relative to the tide, but also different times of year. And so it really sort of starts to promote a full suite of habitats in the estuary that's really good for biodiversity.
And you have a few slides to show us before and after and that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a slide right now that you're seeing just as it's just a picture, really. I wanted to put this in. I spend a lot of time at the Ocean Ranch unit, and this is just a gorgeous picture looking north to Table Bluff, which is also an ecological reserve that CDFW owns and manages. But the following slides will show some of the work that we've done at Ocean Ranch in terms of construction. So we can move to the next slide. Oh, this is an example of how the full tidal hydrology was restored to this site. So there's a picture there on the left of this site in 1979 when it was functioning essentially as a pasture. And you can see the place right now in 2023 after we reconnected the tide to the landscape. That red circle you can see there on this figure is just to orient you to the same location on this image, just so you can get a sense of sort of the full scale of the restoration. So again, to restore this tidal hydrology, we had to do some construction elements, which I think we can see in the next slide. Yeah, so in total, in the estuary component of this project, it's about 570 acres or so. So that's a large scale project. And again, much of the original sloughs and channel networks had been removed as part of the agricultural reclamation of this area. So we had to try and map those original sloughs and channels, and then we had to reconstruct them by digging them. And you can see that here in the main photo, and you can get a scale of the size of some of the primary channels that we've constructed. And then also in the inset photo, you can see the final breach when we actually let the tide back onto this site in 2022.
And this is a pretty recent effort, right? But we've already seen some immediate effects with regard to fish and wildlife species, right? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so since we completed the restoration, this construction component, we've done a lot of monitoring of fish communities and also vegetation communities, which I think we have got some images of that on the next slides. And the purpose of that is to see how effective the work is. And so we've seen really immediate responses in the fish community, which is really great. We've seen increases in fish community diversity, and we're also seeing the fish community respond seasonally to what are now normal hydrological tidal patterns. And so that's really important. It's the kind of fish community that you'd expect to see on a North Coast estuary that's functioning well.
What kind of species specifically?
So a variety of species, but some of the ones that folks are really interested in are juvenile coho salmon are using the site now, and juvenile chinook, which we hadn't seen on this site prior to the restoration. We're also seeing a lot of important species that are ecologically and culturally important, such as surf smelts and other smelts. They're very important to local indigenous communities as a subsistence source, but also smelts act as a forage fish, and so they're an important part of the food web for larger species like salmon and rockfish and other commercially important species. So we're seeing large numbers of those and a greater diversity, and we're also seeing the tidewater goby thrive at this location, and that's a federally listed fish. It's a tiny goby, but it's a specialist in estuaries, and it only occurs in California, so it's doing great here.
And native plants, which can seem like an impossible task, right? To rid properties of invasive species. But we're making progress with regard to native plant communities as well here. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Before I just answer that question, Peter, I just want to acknowledge the slide that's on the screen right now, which is it shows helicopters dropping large wood into the estuary. And so that's part of our fish restoration or habitat restoration strategy for fish. We had the opportunity to place these pieces of wood into the estuary, and that can be good for a variety of estuary processes, but it's also just good structure that fish like to use. So, you know, that was a pretty exciting and big component of this. But just to get back to your point about plants, yeah, so, you know, a big component of this project was the tidal hydrology, but the tidal marsh here is dominated by invasive non-native dense flowered cordgrass, which is similar to many places here on the North Coast. And that plant really changes how the marsh functions, and it reduces primary productivity in the marsh and has a variety of other impacts as well. So we've started trying to control that plant with many other entities such as the Wiyot tribe and federal agencies more regionally to try and suppress that plant a little bit, and start to see some recovery of native plants. And it's a long-term management issue for sure, but we've managed to treat about 40 to 50 acres here at Ocean Ranch, and we're starting to see native plant communities recover. And then a separate component of this project, which isn't in the estuary, it's in the adjacent coastal dunes, is also about removing invasive European beach grass, and we're seeing great response from the native plants in the dunes as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. So before we send our friends further south, give us an insider's tip. If you come to Ocean Ranch Unit, you're driving up the North Coast this summer, you need a break, you need to let the kids out, exercise. Give us an insider's tip, something to do, something to see here at Ocean Ranch. It's such a beautiful place. You cannot drive past 101 without stopping here from now on.
Absolutely.
Give us a tip.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things to do here, but kayaking the sloughs, we have a new non-motorized kayak launch here. Kayaking the sloughs is amazing. If you're coming here in the spring or the fall, this place is a very important stopover place for migratory shorebirds and waterfowl. Hundreds of thousands of them use this location and the neighboring Humboldt Bay. So those times of year are great times to see those species migrating through on their way to breeding grounds. But if you want to come here, if you're more interested in plants, then this right now in May and early June, all of our native June plants are blooming and it's spectacular. So I would recommend that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Beautiful place. Happy to have you all here for a visit. Mona, we'll kick it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize. I think that there was a little confusion between the slides, but I hope everybody enjoyed the talk. I think it's way more fun actually to see the folks that are there. So next we're going to head down to the center of the state, down to Delaney and Monique at the Monterey County at California Central Region, and say hello to them at the Elkhorn Slough Ecological Reserve. So take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Delaney Simpson. I am a California Climate Action Corps Fellow here at the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarian Research Reserve. It's a mouthful. So before we jump into everything estuary, Mona, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and pull up just a map of the slough so we can get an idea of where we are and what we're looking at. So the ocean feeds into the slough for us, and we are in Moss Landing, which is right in the center of Monterey Bay. So Santa Cruz is located just directly north of us, and Monterey is located just directly south of us. I am currently standing just to the south of the main channel of the slough, and you can see me on the little yellow dot on that screen. And just to let everybody know, for moving forward, I will be using the words slough and estuary somewhat interchangeably, just so we don't get confused. Heard.
Sorry, here we go.
Perfect. Anyway, so talking and looking at the slough itself, we are mostly a tidal estuary. So we are directly already connected to the ocean that has a really big influx of tidal influence. So our slough itself is super, super salty, which means we have all sorts of different sea animals that call this place home. So one of the really cool things about the slough is that we have an abundance of different types of wildlife here. We have 100 otters that call this place home, as well as 340 migratory bird species and about 16 endangered species as well. So as much as we love all of our habitats and so many different animals that we have here, it means we definitely have our work cut out for us in terms of restoration. So to help us today explain some of our restoration goals here, I am joined in the field by Monique Fountain. Hi, Monique.
Hi, Delaney.
How's it going?
Good.
Good. So we're standing just north of the slough here, the main channel right behind us. And again, before we get into the estuary and everything we talk about, do you mind telling us just for a moment what our tidal wetland program is?
Sure. The Tidal Wetland Program was started in 2004 to address the issue of marsh loss in our system. We were seeing a lot of marsh losing, and here in Elkhorn Slough, compared to the rest of the state, we've lost about 50% of our tidal marsh. And so it was really important to understand the mechanisms of how we were losing marsh. So we put this together. And what's interesting here is that we have about 15 different agencies that have jurisdiction over the slough. So to do anything here, we need to get everybody together and to work together to figure out the best process and the best projects to do. And so it's a very collaborative process, but we want all of the decisions that they make to be based on the best available science. So we have over 60 scientists from all different disciplines: biologists, geologists, hydrologists, all social scientists, everything, that come together. They identify data gaps, and then we work to fill those gaps and provide information for our decision makers to figure out the best project to do. And that's what led to the project we have here behind us.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. We're so happy to have you guys here and have so many scientists working with us. So thinking about our estuary, you obviously spend a lot of time here and are around here a lot. In terms of wildlife specifically, what is something that you find so special about the slough?
There's a lot of different things. The slough, actually, portions of the slough are a Ramsar site. A Ramsar site is a site of wetland of international importance, and we got that designation because of all the special things that are going on here. This is a very important stop on the Pacific Flyway for migratory birds. And one of our highlight species, of course, are the otters.
Yeah.
And everybody loves to see the otters in Elkhorn Slough.
Absolutely. Our otters are a huge part of it. I think we saw one out here way on our marshes earlier. So if you're looking surrounding the slough and the actual water, we have a lot of salt marsh habitat. It seems obviously a lot of different people, well, animals and people use these marshes. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different benefits for salt marshes. We know for us as people, they do a great job at filtering out sediment and keeping all of our water systems clean. They do a great job at storing carbon, blue carbon specifically, in their complex root system. They're also a nursery, right? And we have so many different animals that come up here into our slough and have their babies use the salt marshes to help us. And I know our otters use them a little bit differently than maybe the otters we might find out in the kelp forest in Monterey Bay. And I think we have a picture too to help us kind of show what our otters out here in the slough do.
Right. And so the otters out in the ocean will spend a lot of time hunting and diving. They'll hang out in the kelp for a little while. Here in Elkhorn Slough, they tend to haul out or even put their babies out on the marsh. Oh, can you turn on the slides, Mona? I'm not sure if we're seeing it. Thank you. So we here in Elkhorn Slough, they haul out on the marsh or they put their babies out there, and this allows them to just save a lot of energy, and they can get out there and they can feed. They eat a lot less, and they that's how they use the marshes here. We have the highest concentration of mothers and pups in the marsh that's behind us out here, behind where we're standing.
Wow, that's so amazing. I love them so much. So we know, and it was mentioned, we have about 90% of California's wetlands were lost. And here in Elkhorn, you just mentioned we have about 50% of the habitat surrounding the slough lost as well. Do we have main reasons or maybe kind of like the set answer to why we have such particular salt marsh loss over here?
So one of the primary reasons here in Elkhorn Slough is what James mentioned for Eel River. We've had a lot of diking and draining in the estuary. And when you dike and drain a wetland, it's like a sponge. It dries right up like a sponge and it shrinks or subsides. And when the dikes are removed or if they degrade and the tidewater comes back in, the land doesn't come back up like a sponge would swell back up. And so we're left with this really degraded habitat that's lower. It's too low to support healthy tidal marsh, but it's also too high to really be a good mudflat. So it doesn't have a lot of those worms and clams and things like that. So we ended up with quite a bit of area in our estuary that was sort of in that in-between area.
Absolutely. So we know we have a historic loss of the habitats here. We know also how important they are to not only the wildlife, but for us as well. So what are we doing about it here at the reserve?
So here at Elkhorn Slough, we've been working on restoring our marshes through adding sediment. And so the marsh behind us, we added about almost 300,000 cubic yards of material, of soil. So some of it came from beneficial reuse on a project that was done a few just to the north of us. And it's just a pretty amazing project. So it was we opened it back up. We've done it in different phases, and we've opened it up. This section behind us was opened up in 2021.
Beautiful.
And yeah,
That's amazing. So we're standing at Hester Marsh right now, which is our restoration site, like Monique mentioned. It's been 3 phases, couple different things to get us going to get our marshes rebuilt. So if we're looking at our slide, and it seems all about elevation when we're talking about ways to restore a coastal habitat. So if you could kind of help us, for those of us that might not be familiar, if we're looking at it, tidal creeks, what are we likely to see in our tidal creeks out there, plants and animals?
all right. So in the tidal creeks, we're seeing the otter that's in the middle there eating a crab.
Yep.
We also see eelgrass, and we have our oysters here.
Amazing. And as we move up to our low salt marsh, are we seeing a huge change?
We are seeing a pretty significant change. You see pickleweed. One of the things that's unique about our estuary is that we're pickleweed dominated. We don't have the cordgrass that other estuaries have. So you really do see a striking change between when you go from subtidal to that vegetated area.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking us through also once we reach our high salt marsh, that's pretty much the last area that we'll find pickleweed?
Well, it does go up a little bit higher, but it's
Even
really
more
that's
so.
the dominated area. And then the area that's just above that, you start to get some of those transitional species that are actually more rare.
Yeah.
And so we planted those in this particular project because they're found in that upland marsh ecotone and you don't see as much of them, but they're all specialized for dealing with salt and living in that particular elevation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So as we can see, obviously elevation, especially in a wetland system, is incredibly important. So determining though, if you wanted to raise the marshes to these different kinds of levels, how did you know where exactly you wanted to raise it to?
So here at Elkhorn Slough, we have a really great research group and also stewardship group. And so at we've learned a lot about this estuary, and it really is all about elevation. We see what's happening there. And so our goal with this project was to raise the elevation of our marsh up high enough to withstand about a meter of sea level rise. So
Yeah.
we don't have any particular date in mind, but because there's so many variabilities in the model, but in this case, what we're looking at is habitat change. So we brought it way up in elevation to put it right at the top of where the tides go so that it'll be here well into the future.
That's amazing. So cool to have that. So looking at this site specifically, and we maybe, Mona, if you could pull up the map of us for our before and after for our restoration work, then we can maybe try to understand, and if you can help us, Monique, explain what this site looked like and what habitats we were looking at before.
Right, so do we have the slide up? Okay, so when that slide gets up, you're going to see on the left-hand side, it's deeper blue. So we're looking down from the top onto this restoration area. You'll see the deeper blue water. That's the subtidal area. It's, again, that area I was talking about where it's not really low enough to support otters and oysters and things like that, not high enough to support marsh. So we brought the soil in, we raised it all the way up. And if you look over on the right-hand side, you see that darker green. So we raised that all the way up in the tidal prism. So now it can support healthy tidal marsh and all the animals that come with it.
That is so incredible. Very cool. And it's really rewarding to be able to stand out here and see it right in front of us now, too, especially getting better. So you mentioned a couple times, obviously, we're adding all this sediment. How is that actually done?
That was done with heavy equipment. And actually, Ducks Unlimited was here. They were a partner with us in this project, and they put a lot of work into it. They were a construction administrator. So they brought in a lot of heavy equipment. I'm turning this way because there is a lot of heavy equipment over there still.
Sure.
And they moved the material out there and brought the level up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And one of the things that was unique about this particular area is that our levees were not intact. So by the time we were working on this project, they were having to work in this really muddy environment.
Yeah.
And so they did a great job.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
Ah, good for them. We're lucky to
Yeah.
have them out here. So we mentioned earlier too that we know salt marshes can store blue carbon. I know that you guys are also doing a little bit of work on that. Could you tell us a bit more about what you know about blue carbon?
Yeah, so blue carbon is the carbon stored in coastal estuaries. Salt marshes, as James mentioned, are particularly good at doing that because as in a sea level rise scenario, the vegetation of the marsh will slow the water down so that any sediment in that water will then drop out. And as that buries the marsh continues to grow up through it. So any carbon that's pulled out of the atmosphere ends up in the roots, and they build layer after layer after layer and store that carbon in the ground forever.
They're so cool, wetland superheroes.
Yes.
So we mentioned also with the project, we're doing it in phases. Is there a reason for this?
The primary reason in the beginning really was because of funding and all of the different things it takes to pull off a project of this size. But now what we've realized is we've learned so much from every phase that we really think this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Phase it so that you can take what you learn in each phase and apply it as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's beautiful. So looking ahead, what are some of your biggest hopes and dreams for the future of this project?
Well, I hope that, we see everything come in. It's a relatively harsh environment being this high in the tidal frame, but we have a lot of marsh coming in, and we have, a lot of the animals coming back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we mentioned earlier, obviously, so many ecosystem services that our salt marshes provide, but is there anything here specifically at the slough that is helping our salt marshes? Can we give them a chance?
In what sense?
Maybe do our animals do anything? Are otters helping the marshes? Or are they only taking
Okay.
away?
Yeah, so the otters are definitely helping the marshes. They eat the crabs. We have a lot of crabs in this estuary, and the crabs get in and they harm the root system of our marsh plants. And so otters love crabs. They eat them all day long, and as they keep that population under control, our marshes become a lot more healthier.
That's incredible. So not only are we working to restore our wetlands for so many ecosystem services, but eventually if we can create this restoration, we'll have some sort of self-resilient ecosystem. And now we can see also our otters helping out our marshes as well. I think that's amazing. We've done so much work here at the slough and are going to continue to do work, not only for the animals and people that already live here and enjoy it, but for future generations as well. That's amazing.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for visiting us, guys, and we'll pass back to you, Mona.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much. And I just want to say sincere apologies for my really poor slide skills here, but I just want you to know that I think the best part of this program is seeing the environmental scientists themselves at the sloughs and at the estuary. So thank you for your patience with me. I think I have it under control now. So next we're going to the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve, and we're going to be doing this down in Southern California. We're going to be speaking with Catherine Wiles, a CDFW Climate Action Fellow, and Elise Arenas, CDFW Senior Environmental Scientist. So I think unless you guys, do you want me to stop share now? So
No, please
everybody
keep
can
sharing.
see. Okay, yeah, just don't stop. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
but you can go ahead and pop it to the next slide.
Okay.
So yes, like Mona said, hi everyone. My name is Catherine Wiles. I'm also a California Climate Action Corps Fellow with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm Elise Arenas. I am a land manager here in North Orange County with CDFW. And we are at the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve. That's what you see behind us. So here's just a little rundown of what we're going to cover. We're going to go through the history of UNBR, which is what we call it, the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve. Because like Delaney said, a lot of these things are mouthfuls. And then we're specifically going to talk about Big Canyon Restoration, project phases 1 and 2, and then also focus on project phase 3, which is creating wetlands, and that's our upcoming restoration. So you can go ahead and advance the slide, Mona. So here's just a little video to help orient us a little bit better. So go ahead and hit play. We're down in the southern part of the state in Orange County, which if you're unfamiliar, we're situated right between Los Angeles and San Diego counties. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. We are in Newport Beach and at the Upper Newport Bay. We can get to the next one. Perfect. So this is what you're looking at right now is the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve. And as a few of our colleagues have mentioned, it's an estuary, and an estuary is where the river meets the sea, right? But looking at this map, a few things are pretty evident right away. One might be you're not really seeing a river meeting the sea here. That's because our traditional river, the Santa Ana River, which comes from 100 miles away in the San Bernardino mountain range, typically would have led out here, but due to flooding and urban development, it's been channelized and lets out north of us between Newport and Huntington Beach. So now our main freshwater input comes from the San Diego Creek. There are a few others as well. And then also all of the urban runoff that happens in our watershed. Because the other thing you can see is we are very much surrounded by urban development. You can see it behind us here as well. There are homes right up on the bluff behind us. On this map, it's pretty evident how close all of the development gets to the bay. And if you look towards the bottom of the map, down past that yellow star, you can kind of see what we call the lower Newport Bay, which is like Balboa Peninsula, Balboa Island, for those who are familiar. It's a very privatized area. There are private homes, private docks, private beaches. That was the plan for the Upper Newport Bay as well, until one day in 1963, a grassroots effort basically kicked off here in Upper Newport Bay, led mostly by one family, the Robinsons, but they had others that joined them eventually. The plan was to develop the Upper Newport Bay, privatize it, but Frances Robinson, who's the mom in the family, actually knew that this was not technically legal, that the beaches in California are public property up to the mean high tide line. And so that led a decade-long fight to take place. Lucky for us, the Robinsons and their environmentalist friends were successful. And in 1975, the Fish and Game Commission established the Upper Newport Bay as a state ecological reserve. So we just had our 50th anniversary here, which is pretty special. So that means 752 acres of estuary and wetland are protected. About a decade and a half after that, the city of Newport Beach also added some area to protection, bringing the total acreage to about 1,000 acres of protected wetland. A little bit more about the history of the bay. This is Tongva and Ahashiman land. And in the there were two main industries here in our bay. From the early 1900s to about the 1960s, salt harvesting was very common and lucrative. Salt dikes, and you can still see the footprint of here in the bay. The another main industry was calcium mining, actually on Shellmaker Island, which the yellow star for the Back Bay Science Center, that's where we actually work. That's on Shellmaker Island. We are open to the public on Sundays from 10 to 2, so plug for that. Come see us, come hang out. But there were lots of shells there, and so they were mined for calcium for chicken feed mostly, actually, which is a fun fact. But going forward, you can see, again, some of the threats to our bay, the urban encroachment, the human impact, and sea level rise. And to talk a lot more about that, I'm going to throw it over to Elise.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Next slide, please. I'm going to dive into a little bit of what's been done at the Big Canyon, in Big Canyon rather, and then I'll talk about what future plans we have. We are standing in Big Canyon, and this site has major history of disturbance. So the creek has been altered so much that the hydrology has changed the natural flow of the Big Canyon Creek, which is the main creek that flows through the canyon and out to the MPA, or the Marine Protected Area, also our estuary. We have high levels of selenium in our watershed here. That's a naturally occurring nutrient. With urban development, we're kind of leaching that nutrient out a little bit faster. And in high levels or high concentration, it can actually be harmful to our waterfowl and our aquatic life. So we're trying to address that here as well. Behind us, we call the infamous Cattail Pond. It's a freshwater-ish pond. It is a big breeding ground for mosquitoes, so it's a major issue being so close to a community here. And then we have a history of invasive species or weeds that have kind of taken over the site. So back in 2017, this project, phase 1, started. It was predominantly led by the city of Newport Beach. They were trying to address the water quality issue. And so along with addressing the water quality issue, they did a little restoration. So they rerouted some fresh water flow to be treated. They created bioretention cells. I'm gonna pause for the plane. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it's very loud for us. It is very loud for us. We are in the flight path to the John Wayne Airport. So one moment, please. Talk about urban encroachment. So phase 1 was completed in 2017. It's a little under 10 acres, and that's in the maintenance and monitoring phase with the city of Newport Beach. For phase 2, a little bit over 11 acres. This project site, or this restoration, was predominantly led by the Newport Bay Conservancy, one of our nonprofit partners here at the Bay. And in support of this project, we are trying to take out the Brazilian pepper tree, monoculture, as we'll call it, and I have a couple photos, but not yet. Don't move the slide yet. Sorry, that was misleading. So we addressed, this was more restoration focused, trying to recreate a proper flow or channel, take out the non-native Brazilian pepper tree. This project, as I mentioned, was led by the Newport Bay Conservancy and supported by the City of Newport Beach, CDFW, the Ocean Protection Council, the State Coastal Conservancy, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So a lot of partners played a big role in this restoration project. And I will highlight a little bit more about that in the next slides. And then phase 3, which is the most exciting part and yet to come, is where we get to create some wetlands. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, see what we got here for you. So this is phase 2. This is just an example or a couple photos of what the monoculture of pepper trees was. This has now changed quite drastically. As you can see, nothing really is growing under this dense canopy of trees. These trees also have the capacity to change the soil chemistry. So it really outcompetes a lot of our native habitat that support a lot of our listed species. Next slide, please. And then here is some fun volunteers and staff members. Just 1 year, I believe, after those pepper trees were removed, and you can start to see some of that native habitat come back. So just wanted to highlight the difference in the landscape there. Next slide, please. And then this is what was generally created. So in the yellow and the blue on the map, you see wet alkali and high alkali meadows. A lot of the plants that were selected for those areas are very similar plants that you see in our high marsh in the estuary here. The idea for that was to allow, as our sea level rises and takes out some of our lower marsh and mud flat areas, a place for animals like that forage in our wetlands to kind of migrate and hang out during high tides.
We have our green layer, which is our riparian corridor, and that is mostly focused on supporting habitat for the least-billed vireo, the yellow warbler, if you're a bird person, yellow-breasted chat. So it's kind of exciting. In orange here on the map, it's our what we call our coastal sage scrub transitional zones, and that is predominantly supporting our listed California gnatcatcher. And then those meadows could support Belding savanna sparrow, other federally listed plant species as well that are salt marsh. And those habitat types do very well here because we have a history of soil dredge directly from the bay that was deposited into Big Canyon. So we are sitting on very salty soil, so it is able to support a lot of very salt tolerant plants, which is kind of unique, I will say. Next slide. So we're going to talk about phase 3. Phase 3 is kind of exciting. Here's just kind of like a preliminary design of what it might be. Next slide, please. One moment. There you go. So we have existing conditions. That means what is here now. And I just kind of want to highlight in the darker green at the top of the map is kind of another pepper tree mix that we'll need to take care of. In the middle, that lighter greenish yellow, it's hard to tell what color it is outside here, so sorry, is kind of that freshwater pond that I described that is a mosquito breeding habitat. So just want to highlight those areas. This project is about a 30-foot footprint, or 30-acre, footprint, and that is the outline in the black. The actual restoration project that will take place is going to be about 14 acres of restored habitat. This footprint is very large because there is a focused dredging component. There is, we're removing the cattails and doing some like enhancement on the lower side of that graph. Sorry, there's a plane flying over. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I'm going to pause. So kind of just highlighting what is here. I can take questions on the specifics of this later if you want, but next slide, please, for the sake of time. So the goals of this restoration, this is a preliminary design. This project has a technical advisory committee that is led by the Newport Bay Conservancy. And so there's a lot of regulators, stakeholders, biologists, engineers, soil scientists, you name it, sitting on this advisory board that put a lot of thought and effort into the design of this project. So just kudos to that team, and we thank them for all their work in creating a design. So this was one of the preliminary designs where we are to create some marsh habitat, which is very exciting. So some of the goals are to remove the weeds and restore a historical salt marsh that is connected directly to our estuary. So I think I mentioned focused dredging a little earlier. So there will be some focused dredging in the channel to allow for the proper tidal influence to support those wetlands. We are going to restore the riparian corridor connected to phase 2, which will support that least-billed vireo that I mentioned as well. And we're finally addressing that mosquito breeding habitat. And we are always addressing in each phase of this project the selenium nutrient that it does flow. We experience, I don't know that I mentioned it earlier, but we do experience dry weather flow here. So we get water running through the Big Canyon Creek year round. That's not normal. In the past, it would be seasonal, but that is all urban runoff. So we have water year round in this site in our creek that flows into the estuary. And then before I get to the bullet point, this project will also enhance a lot of the bolded bullet point, I should say. This project will enhance a lot of our trails, which will provide a lot of recreational and educational benefits to the local community and school groups that do explore the area. And we'll pan to our trail. To the trail. So this is one of the trails you can take. It's open to the public, and we hope you can join us one day. And then behind us, we do have the actual project phase 3 site behind me. You can kind of see the cattails in the darker, I don't know what it looks like on your screen, but on mine, it looks kind of like brownish reeds, I'll say. In the distance, you can kind of see the Brazilian pepper tree in the back there. So we're going to create wetlands with that are supported by long-term sea level rise. What does that mean? So the design was developed in a way where we are grading our topography. In the last group they mentioned, or the last site they mentioned, it's all about elevation, right? So we are creating those mud flats, the low, mid, transitional, high marsh areas that will support a lot of our listed species in the marsh, including the Belgian savanna sparrow, our ridgeway rail, and then one of our federally endangered plants, the salt marsh bird's beak, which is pretty exciting. As sea level rises and climate changes, we are going to lose a lot of our mudflats and estuaries in the lower bay. So this is a very unique opportunity to create wetlands that water can flow in and out of, support marsh habitat, and provide all of those other ecosystem benefits that, you know, we depend on day to day. So like flooding, clean water, nursery for fish, those types of things. We are very fortunate to have a project that is very supported and funded to create wetlands. And so I think I'm going to go to the next slide. I've said enough about that, I believe. So we invite you, come to the Bay. The Newport Bay Conservancy does host weekly events every Thursday from 9 to 12. They are focused mostly on phase 2, and I assume their involvement will continue throughout phase 3. This type of work cannot be, although it is on city and state land, this work could not be possible without the support of our nonprofits. And so they also host bird surveys every Thursday of the month, and they do some veg monitoring if you wanted to dip your toes into that. Next slide, if you do want to get involved, you can feel free to email me and I will hook you up with the right people. And I think now we will toss it back to our MC to take any questions.
Oh, that's awesome, you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was such a fun tour. It was so great to see Southern California, which I miss. And thank you guys for kind of ending the tour for us. Now it's time for Q&A. I apologize once again for the slide problems, but I want to thank you all for being here. It was fun to travel up and down the coast. So I'm going to turn it over to Bradley Siebold now. Bradley, did we get questions today during our program?
Yes, we had a number of great questions, both general and for our specific estuaries. I'm going to start off with some general questions that maybe any one of you can answer. First question, what are the best strategies that are being used to reduce pollution and runoff into the estuaries?
You want me to take that one? Oh, so I can
Can
answer
you-
that one.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yep, I can go ahead quick. So here in Elkhorn Slough, there's a number of different strategies happening. One of our partner organizations, the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, which is an accredited land trust, is purchasing from willing sellers property around the estuary and reducing the farms off of steep hills to a more sustainable footprint, and that's reducing the runoff into the slough.
Great.
I can also highlight a couple of projects. So we have a few nonprofit partners here, the Newport Bay Conservancy, as I mentioned a few times, and Project Grow is another one. They do a lot of outreach and education, bring community groups in to just like create, I like to say, those next stewards of our environment. So I think the more people know, the more they can make educated decisions and weigh in on different policies. So I am an advocate for that. I will also highlight that the City of Newport Beach funded a big engineering project here in the San Diego Creek. It is called the Trash Interceptor. I encourage you to Google it or look it up. It is meant to catch trash and remove it into a dumpster throughout the year. So that is something that just got launched this year, which is pretty exciting.
Great, thank you. One of our other general questions was, what is being done to control nutrient cycling?
I feel like that's a bit of a complex question. I don't know if we're going to dive into that very thoroughly here,
Sure.
but I do think that restoring degraded habitats into native habitat does help in that nutrient cycling effort. And I think that's a lot of what was highlighted today. I'm happy to chat offline about that a little bit more if that wasn't a satisfying answer.
No, that was great. I know we don't have time for all of our questions and some of them might get very complex. So I'm going to go to some of our specialized questions for our specific estuaries now. I'm going to start with our Peter and James at Eel River in Humboldt County. So let me get you in there. So I see that you are in jackets right there. Is there a recommended gear or clothing or shoes to visit this specific estuary or this location?
Yeah, absolutely. You should, the weather changes quickly here. The wind's always blowing though. It's a rare day when it's not blowing, so you should make sure that you're wearing layers. You should be ready for sun protection and warmth. And you should wear some stout shoes. If you want to explore some parts of the marsh plain, you can do that. So that'll require knee boots. But we do have graveled interpretive trails that you can stay on. So just normal stout walking shoes. And they would also be great for the dunes here as well, where you can go and explore the wave slope or the fore dunes and look at all of the native plants that are out there. So yeah, so I would say layers with a view to wind protection and sun protection.
Great. We also had a question relating to one of your slides at Eel River. There was a photo of a helicopter bringing in a tree. People were asking, like, where did you get this tree or this wood? Are you sourcing it from a specific locale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So CDFW, the Eel River Wildlife Area, is made up of several management units, as you saw, I think, from the map in one of the slides early on. And the Ocean Ranch unit is one of those management units. We also have close by, less than a mile away, a place called the Table Bluff Ecological Reserve. And our team is also doing a coastal scrub and western lily restoration project on Table Bluff. So Table Bluff historically had coastal scrub vegetation on it and also supported western lily, which is state and federally endangered plant. But over the years, spruce trees have encroached into the western lily habitat, and they don't do very well with that type of shading. And there's been other disturbance impacts as well since Euro-American contact here on the North Coast. So in addition to doing Ocean Ranch unit, we're also working to thin that spruce forest out to let some light into the western lily habitat to promote the recovery and growth of that plant. But we also wanted to have beneficial use for those trees that we're extracting from that restoration project. And we did two things with those trees. One of them is we helicoptered them into Ocean Ranch unit for the structure that we talked about earlier. But then the other thing is the Wiyot Tribe Reservation is immediately adjacent to the Table Bluff Ecological Reserve. So we also helicoptered some of those trees to the reservation as well for use as firewood.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to turn now to the Elkhorn Slough in Monterey County for Delaney and Monique. Are there certain plant species that the otters associate with in the slough, or does their diet change from the slough to the ocean?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and answer that one. So particularly when we see the otters interacting with our salt marshes, those are mostly made out of pickleweed. So that's really the main plant that we see them, hauled up onto or resting on, such like that. And then in the slough, their diet does change a pretty fair amount. So out in the kelp forest in Monterey, they'll be eating a lot of like sea urchins, oysters. They'll be diving down, looking into the rocks. Out here in the slough, they're a little bit spoiled. They don't have to dive so far. We're pretty shallow, so typically they're looking around on the sea or slough floor. So a lot of things in our mud habitats, like a fat innkeeper worm. They're only about this big, but they look like a big hot dog. And otters really like eating those out here. They also eat, as we mentioned, a lot of the striped shoreline crabs, which help us a lot. And then any of the other things we'll see, like mollusks. We also have oysters and clams out here as well.
Great. We also had some questions about the sediment that was used to build up the marsh. There are questions about where did it come from? Is there a specific, grain of sediment or sand or material that is used to build up the marsh?
Yeah, so most of the soil that we used for the restoration came right here from the hillside. If the hillside behind me actually went straight out for quite a ways and then dropped down. So this material was moved right out. And in doing that, we were able to gently grade the hillside to allow for marsh migration in the future. So there's areas for it to come up to. It's relatively sandy. This is an old sand dune. And we thought maybe because of what we've seen with our marshes, that the lower marshes are a little bit waterlogged. We thought maybe the sandy material, putting it in would help them drain more. And I think over time, as we study more of the below ground processes, we'll understand. But so far, the vegetation's doing really well, and what we have measured looks good. So I think that even though it's not exactly what was in here before, over time, it will accumulate more fine sediment and be more like the rest of the marshes.
Right. And a follow-up question, was there a specific amount of soil, like in cubic feet or cubic meters, that you moved?
There was. So for the entire 3 phases of the project, we moved almost 500,000 cubic yards of material, and we restored about 120 so acres of tidal marsh.
Great, great. Follow-up, are there any species that have come back since the restoration that you've been surprised to see?
Well, we had always hoped that this restoration, though this restoration being right next to where the sea otters are and their highest concentration of mother pups, we had always hoped that they would be here, and they did. They came back in, and I think we were pleasantly surprised to see that they were starting to move in, not large numbers, but they are using the area. And we've also caught some fish. We caught a diamond turbot that we hadn't expected to see, and that was great. So we're seeing a lot of young fish using the tidal channels, and then of course all of the animals that want to feed on those young fish come in too.
Great. How was the modeling done for like the elevation and habitat? Is there, sorry, that might be a complex question, but
That is a little bit of a complex question, but we have a great research group here led by Kirsten Wasson. And as a National Estuarine Research Reserve, we do a lot of monitoring and modeling. One of the ways we looked at the elevations, we looked at what was here and the rest of the estuary. Where is this elevation divide? Where are the habitats changing and different? And that helped us determine that we could put our marsh very high in the tidal frame, because everywhere else in the estuary, we have very healthy tidal marsh at this high elevation.
great. Thank you for your answers. I'm going to go to Upper Newport Bay in Orange County with Catherine and Elise right now. We had some questions about bioretention cells from the phase 1 slide, just about what they are in terms of just wanting more information.
Sorry, unmuting here. Yeah, so the idea was to kind of do two things. Take that dry weather flow that we're getting annually and rediverting it to a treatment facility or off-site so that the selenium levels are kind of migrated out of the Big Canyon Creek. And then they created some, you can think like wetlands bioretention cells where they're like holding basins where water will flow in, capture that, and with the native vegetation that was created, they're held there and they will filter into the ground. And the idea is that similar to what our wetlands do when they clean our water, you know, as the water kind of refills groundwater or drains down, it can be cleaned. Hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of the basic idea.
Yeah, thank you. And one of your slides, you talked about beaches being public in California. And you mentioned also the mean high tide specifically, and somebody just had a question about how is the mean high tide measured and how would I know where that is on the coastline? So.
Yeah, so there's a lot of models that you can go out. So the Coastal Commission might be a resource. I would look at NOAA. They have pretty good tide charts and predictions. And so you're thinking just like if the high tide hits, that's it for the day. Mean high tide, yeah. And that varies. So we are influenced by the ocean. We get 2 high tides, 2 low tides every day. So that changes every day. The high tide and the low tide will fluctuate throughout the year based on the position of the moon and us rotating in space. But like I think that if you go to NOAA tide predictions and kind of look at your nearest location, wherever you are, the mouth of or the entrance of the upper Newport Bay might be a good location to poke around. Hopefully that helps.
And I would think that also regulates that, right?
They are one of the regulators. Yep. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I had a question returning to Eel River with Peter and James. There's a questions about like Scott's Dam. Are you related to that project at all, or is that a separate project by Lake Pillsbury?
Yes. Yeah. So I personally am not related to that project, but CDFW is, of course, involved with that work. And as that relates to some of the work we're doing down here in the estuary, you know, Monique referenced the importance of elevation and restoring marshes by providing sediment to lift those elevations where they're not able to do that themselves. One of the benefits we have here in the Eel River is the Eel River is a very sediment heavy system, and there's lots of erosion in the watershed. And so we see a lot of sediment deposition from the Eel River watershed. And we anticipate that with dam removal, there's going to be additional sediment inputs into that system that are going to flush through, and that they actually might enhance some of the work we're doing down here in the estuary in terms of tidal marsh accretion.
Great. Thank you. And we have a general question. How does like CDFW decide which sites are getting restored first? Is it, or are they all being worked on at the same time?
I guess I'll take the first start of that. You know, CDFW is divided into different management regions. So I'm here working in the northern region, or region 1. And so within our region, we sort of look at our landscape and we see, you know, the work that is easiest for us. We do 2 types of work, essentially. We work on lands that we own and manage. That's the easiest type, because obviously we have sort of management jurisdiction over those lands. And then we work with partners on their lands as well. So in terms of our own properties, you know, we have a prioritization process whereby we're guided by various documents that CDFW has. The State Wildlife Action Plan is potentially one of those, and then other more finer scale documents. And we go through and we see which projects, it's sort of opportunistic in some respects, but it's strategic opportunism, I would say. We prioritize the different landscapes and the habitat types, and then we figure out how easily we can work with partners and maybe get funding for these types of projects, and then sort of structure it from there. But we always have multiple restoration projects going on at the same time of varying scales for different types of those habitats, because we typically don't prioritize one important habitat over another. And it's more just about, it often comes down to our logistic ability to do a project in space and time.
Great, thank you.
And I can answer for us here in Elkhorn Slough. It's a similar process, but it happened within the tidal wetland program, where we looked at all of our degraded areas and prioritized them, again, based on a number of different habitat factors, as well as accessibility and the different kinds of projects that we could do here.
Great, great, thank you. We had a general question just about, you know, heavy machinery. Is there it is impacting the environment when you use, you know, heavy machinery. What are some strategies being used to mitigate that?
For me, so for here in Elkhorn Slough, the heavy equipment was moved right to the edge of the area that we were starting to work in, so it really didn't go around a lot of our other areas. And it worked, you know, just moving that material out onto the marsh. It was all low ground pressure equipment, which I think was very helpful, but it still compacted it. And it was interesting because in order to get a really high elevation, you just have such a narrow range where tidal marsh exists that if you want to push it right up to that top, that compacting of the heavy equipment is really good. But then you have some challenges with the plants. So after that, we went through and decompacted that surface, and that allowed the plants then to come in, settle out, and grow.
Right. Thank
And
you.
I would add to that too. There's potentially impacts from heavy equipment, that's for sure. And there's lots of strategies that we sort of use broadly to think about minimizing those and avoiding them. And, Monique mentioned some there. Some of the things that we do is we avoid certain times of the year when we know birds or aquatic resources like fish are going to be present. So we avoid doing work under those circumstances. So that's called in-water work periods or bird nesting season. We avoid those types of things. If we can't avoid those, then we might do some things like dewater a small section of our site, use excavators in that dewatered section so that there's no fish present. And then similar for birds, we can do careful bird surveys to make sure there's going to be no impacts to those animals as we do that. And then again, as Monique noted, there's low pressure equipment and low pressure mats to try and reduce compaction. And also we just minimize the access routes. So we don't drive all over the site, but we stick to, as few access routes as possible to get the work done. So we're not spreading that construction impact across a larger area.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a question for Eel River again, and it's just about, or more generally, just about funding. I know CDFW is, a state agency. Do you also get funding from, federal grants or private organizations to help in these, ecological, programs?
Yeah, absolutely. This was all of these projects that we're referencing today are large scale, complex projects, and you can't do them without good partners, and that includes funding partners. And so for the Ocean Ranch Restoration Project, we received funding from the State Coastal Conservancy, as well as the Wildlife Conservation Board. We also got some funding through some of our own programs here at CDFW, but we also got federal funding from the US Fish and Wildlife Service as well. So, and there are potentially other different sources of both federal and state funding out there as well that we have pursued for other projects. But yeah, it's those types of funding partners, both state and federal, are critical for this work.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Elkhorn. You mentioned oysters. Are there also invasive oysters in your slough, or native oysters, or what varieties or types of oysters are in your reserve?
Great. Yes, we do have oysters. We have had a population decline in our native oyster, the Olympia oyster. And again, our research coordinator, Kerstin Wasson, that has been her real drive in life, is to bring this oyster back to the estuary. She's part of the NOOC, which is the National Oyster, I don't know the name of it. The Olympia Oyster Collaborative, thank you. And so she's been working very hard on bringing that oyster back into this estuary, and as well as working with the Nature Conservancy to do it. And given that opportunity, I do want to mention our funders are very similar to what James mentioned. We have the Ocean Protection Council, we had Department of Water Resources, California, we had CDFW Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program, Wildlife Conservation Board, and also U.S. Fish and Wildlife funding. So again, it takes a big effort to get a project like this done.
Yeah, great. I have a question back to Upper Newport Bay. I understand that, kayaking and canoeing are available. Is this a popular activity at your location?
Sorry, you asked that question just as a plane flew, so we were trying to listen. I think I got it. Yes, you can recreate here. It's very popular. kayaking and paddleboarding are allowed, or non-motorized boats. In the reserve, you have a couple options. I mentioned the Newport Bay Conservancy. They do host, if you want, a guided tour every Saturday.
Really great price.
Really great price. You get a guide, they take you around, a very educational, great experience. Or you can rent out kayaks at the Newport Aquatic Center. And if you have your own kayak or paddleboard, you can park for free at the Newport Aquatic Center from sunrise to sunset, and you can just launch directly off the beach right there. There are signs. There's a certain point where it's wildlife only, so just be mindful of that.
Thank you. I have a kind of a general question going back to like the pollution. I know you're in, different locations throughout the state. Some of you are, urban, and some of you might be closer to agricultural areas. How does this affect like the runoff going through the estuary? Is that a major impact for, like Elkhorn?
I feel like maybe I might have answered that question already, and that's with the Elkhorn Slough Foundation is working hard to acquire land from willing sellers around the estuary to protect runoff, and that's from a lot of we've had historically strawberries farms that are put on very steep hills, and it's very sandy here, so that the hillsides tend to erode, and that comes into the estuary. We're also at the end of the Salinas River, and so we tend to get some impacts from that as well. And I think there's a number of programs, and this is a real hot spot for education and a lot of organizations that are here working on those problems. And so we definitely are all focused on it.
Great. Thank you. I think that's it for questions. I want to thank all of you and all of our estuaries throughout the state. You did a great job, and I learned a lot today. So thank you so much for all that you shared with us.